Sure. Hi, stream.
Yeah, I have to close. I have to close it when I'm streaming.
I officially got my test results back today. So Los Angeles has encouraged everyone to get tested, whether you have symptoms or not. So because we're trying to build a statistical pool. So I got my test literally back today. I'm COVID free.
Nice.
This was the RNA test. So this isn't the antibody one. That one, the RNA test for live virus or active virus is being done by LA County. I think all of California, but LA County for free for anybody who wants it now. We have enough capacity for anybody to get tested. So, and again, they've encouraged us to do so we can get an actual statistical view of the population rather than just, if somebody feels sick, they likely are sort of view.
Science.
Right. That's probably, for Christy and me, for the purposes of the gym, we're not reopened yet. It'll be a while before we are, for safety's sake. But one of the things we're going to be doing is antibody tests for all of our coaches, us included, and then of course regular testing. So hopefully, we can get the antibody test and soon. That's I think our insurance offers it, but it's not cheap, unfortunately, unlike the live test.
Yeah. Yeah, where are my Skittles? Yep, and you brought a whole bag to Gen Con once. I think it was Gen Con. Mm.
It gives you plenty of time to save up for what your purchase is next year. That's the. Oh, nice. Yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
Still May.
It's Blur's Day.
Hi, Tracy and Sam.
Hey, everybody. I feel like a decade in between appearances is the right thing to do. That's keeps them on more. Yeah. 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 Yeah, exactly. I've owned it for a while, so it was a good excuse to read it. Thank you for that. Yeah. I know.
Uh,
Better to know
yep,
now.
absolutely. It's coming through in the recording, but it's not in the stream. It does it every now and then. I always know how to fix it. OBS for some reason just forgets which microphone to pull from every now and then, but it should be there. Yep.
Yeah.
A
Yep.
certain
There it is.
stranger with the name on the chat, FT Hurley, has informed us of this information. I don't know if anybody knows who FT Hurley is.
No idea.
Sounds like a carnival
Certainly
barker.
not married to anybody on the show tonight. So anyway, so yeah, we were talking about David was on, a decade or so ago, and but we've kept up. But you've also you're out in the LA area, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you have you've been acting and doing that kind of stuff, right? Theater and screen and
Yeah. Acting and producing and writing and all of that. I've got a day job too, like so many of us out here. And then, on top of that, my wife and I run a gym, a small fitness studio. So, and when I turned the year I turned 40, I decided to sort of turn my life around and find a way to get fit. And so, a good friend of mine offered to train me. He was a CrossFit person, and CrossFit wasn't the right thing for me. I had never really had fitness in my life. I'm a Dungeons and Dragons basement dwelling nerd indoor kid, and so I didn't feel comfortable in that world. So we sort of figured out between the two of us, and then with some other friends and partners, how to make fitness appealing for us. And out of that came a gym here in Los Angeles, but unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, called Nerd Strong. And there were a handful of us who ran that gym for 4 years together, and then it ran a couple more years without us. And then in the meantime, my wife Christy and I have created a gym called Hero's Journey Fitness that launched last year. Unfortunately, is closed right now due to the pandemic and some construction, but we'll be back, when we're all able to open. So this is a subject that's very dear to my heart, nerds and finding our path to health and fitness, whatever that means for us and for our bodies.
nice. Yeah, and I knew that about you. I remember seeing. I think it was from the Nerd Strong gym. Was it the big chalkboard, and it would have like the to-do list, but it was sort of like laid out like earning your experience points or going on a quest, sort of.
We experimented with a bunch of things when we were doing Nerd Strong. We had 4 years there, and then before we left that group, and we tried a lot of different things, sort of gamifications and theming and adventure style, just to sort of in sort of our quest to figure out what worked best for us for our healthy activity. What helped people most. Most of the people that we served there, as at Hero's Journey now, are people who haven't typically had a lot of fitness or physical activity in their lives, either, like me as a kid, just weren't participatory in that kind of stuff, or, maybe they were when they were younger and it fell away. And a traditional gym environment feels very intimidating to a lot of us, whatever our level of fitness. It still feels that way to me. And so creating an environment and workouts that made us feel welcome and loved and appreciated, and that acknowledged that one size fits all is never the answer for this kind of thing, that everybody's journey is individual, and that if we bring the things that we love into a place that is scary, like the gym, it makes the place a little less scary, a little more welcoming and warm. And then knowing you're surrounded by people who share interests with you, it's a little bit like being at a convention, except that you're at a gym and going to work out. So, yeah.
Nice. So this is our second episode. So in our first episode, at the end of it, we all sort of set our own sort of personal goals for what we wanted to accomplish sort of in the next month before recording this episode. And so this is the part of the show where we sort of check in on that. We sort of see how everybody's doing in terms of meeting their own fitness goals and where they're at and that kind of stuff. So is there anybody who would like to volunteer to go first? And David, we're going to check in with you too, and you can just sort of tell us what you've been working on and how you're doing.
Sure. Do you want me to start, or when you guys?
Sure, if you would like to. You've had the floor recently, so that just flows.
Oh, sure. Well, I actually have had a fitness goal, a specific health goal, I should say, over the past few months. And I think this is, as we talk about the book, I'm going to interject a lot of this stuff, but I suffer from chronic depression, and I had a really rough year last year, mentally, emotionally, and therefore physically, because that stuff cascades into your physical life. And so I had blood work early in the year, as I often do. I went to get a physical, and my cholesterol was quite high. I have, it runs in my family, so I always have sort of high cholesterol, but it was alarmingly high. And so I've spent the last 3 months trying to, appreciate and embrace a kind of lifestyle from when I was healthier, clinically healthier, and then also change my diet a little bit as a result of my depression. My love language with food is sugar, and especially candy. And so the way that I had eaten for the previous 6 months had affected my body pretty dramatically. And so I actually just got my blood work back this morning too. It's a weird, fortuitous day today. I did a body scan in preparation for this, and then I also got my blood work back and talked to my doctor, and I am on the right path. My numbers have come into more of a closer to normal range, although I'm still elevated in some key areas that I'm paying attention to. So my goals were mostly around making sure I was doing cardio as well as strength work, because I had fallen into a pattern of the things I like to do, lift heavy things and jump, instead of running or rowing or skiing. So incorporating some cardio back into my life, and then changing my diet, trying to be more reasonable about my sugar intake, which will dovetail nicely with the book when we come to talk about it. So I feel pretty good about it. The beginning of the pandemic quarantine was a little rough, I think, for a lot of us. Again, I'm an emotional eater, which is perfectly fine. It's part of how I cope with my external environment being disrupted. So it was a little bit up or down, but I'm doing better than I was 3 months ago, which is the most important thing.
Nice. And so we will switch. I'm just going to go in order around the circle of what I see in the stream. So Sam, tell us how your last month has gone.
So it's okay. I'm down 2 pounds, but as everyone knows, that's kind of, now I've been down those 2 pounds for 5 days consistent. 2 pounds, give or take 2 pounds per person my size already. That's like, water weight one day, right? So I don't really consider that a win, but it's also not a lose either. So I guess it's maybe an even. I have probably, I've walked, my wife and I have walked, not as much as I should have, but more than I probably would have if I wasn't being as I'm trying to be. So, baby steps, right? Like that's kind of what I keep telling myself. I'm having a really rough couple of weeks mentally, because of I do some work in the summer that is related to the CDC. So there's some uncertainty with that job, and there's some uncertainty with, am I gonna get called in and have to go work with a team of people and possibly put myself in danger, and that of course gives my wife some heartburn, and so there's some mental, emotional things going on there that haven't been the nicest of days for the past couple of weeks. But I feel like overall, given the entirety of the situation and the whole COVID pandemic and the entireness of everything that's happening, I feel like I'm doing okay. I'm trying to do things every day that de-stress me so that I can actually sleep better, and then I feel good enough the next day to actually take a break and step away and say, hey, let's go for a walk, or let's do something more active, or let's, get away from the computer, or, whatever. And so I feel like I'm making tiny baby step progress. So I haven't stepped back, so that's good, but I'm not making giant leaps forward either. But I think I'm okay with that. I've made peace with that particular part of the journey. I have listened to almost the entire book, so I've gotten to about 2/3 of the book, maybe 3/4 even. And so I think we're going to have a pretty good conversation about that today, because I have a lot to say, I think, as a biologist.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Awesome.
there were big chunks of the book. I'm like, I look forward to hearing what Sam has to say about that, right? Because of any of us, you have more scientific expertise, and they're trying to lean on a scientific premise. So I'll be curious to hear about that. I should have started off by asking you to remind us what your goals were. I think it involved going on regular walks and losing a certain number of pounds, right?
Yeah. So my goals, I really hesitated the last episode to actually put a number on weight loss, because for me it's not about the number, it's about sleeping better. That was my main sort of thing. But in the interest of having an actual measurable goal, I did put a number on it. I said I wanted to probably, I wanted to lose, if I'm being totally honest, if I'm on my game every day, I should be losing, a couple pounds a week, at least a pound a week. And so that would put me at a square between 4 and 6 pounds, and I only lost 2. So I didn't really meet my number goal, but my main overarching goal is actually to feel better and sleep better. So that I'm making progress towards. So I'm, like I said, I didn't take humongous steps forward, but I didn't step back either.
Right.
So
good. So let's check in then with Tracy. Tracy, first of all, remind us what your goal was, and then tell us how you did.
Well, and mine wasn't a weight loss goal. It was about keeping my blood sugar in a good level. Mm-hmm. And by and large, I did. So one thing is that I've been doing my journey at least since the end of January, because my blood sugar numbers are up. So I think we're about 3 months or so in, and it's usually a time when people need a break from. And the reason I'm saying that is for the last week or so has also been the first time that a lot of the stuff around COVID really hit me, and a few other things. So I kind of just took this past week off, and I just want to be honest about that part. And I also, because of, I have been experimenting with more intermittent fasting, which I don't think we get into in this part of the book. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about 14 hours, so I still can even eat breakfast if I want. I'm just limiting the times when I'm eating, and I had tried to go a little more low carb. But I think it makes more sense to talk about that as we talk about some of the science, and maybe either this episode or next.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So how do your blood sugar numbers, have they been steady or better, or you track that? Track that a lot more. I don't have the means to track my blood sugar easily, so you track that a lot more.
Yeah, so they've been fairly at least even, and in some ways a little better. Particularly my morning number. I started doing the intermittent fasting and also eating lower carb.
Right.
So those have been good, and we're experimenting and learning about that stuff.
Nice, very good. Yeah, so my goals were, I set 2 goals. One, I'd started running, and I talked a little bit about the difficulty because of the pandemic, getting to the gym, and I related to what you had said, David. For a long time, I've been, outside of a few years to finish grad school, I've been a regular visitor of the gym. But when I go, I'm all about picking up heavy things, right? Because Because it's more interesting.
Very
like
satisfying.
You do it for a little while, and then you move on to something else, and you never quite get bored with it, right? I go running, or I'm on a treadmill, and I'm bored out of my skull 5 minutes in, and it doesn't do a lot of good, right? But with the gym closed, that hasn't been an option. I don't have access to decent weights in my home. I've got some light, 5-pound things and whatever, so I could do a little bit with that, and my son has been. But I had started just before the gym closed. I had started trying to incorporate some running into my routine because I recognized that there was an imbalance in what I was doing with my workouts. And so I started doing a little bit of running then, and so I've just focused a lot more on that since I've been locked down. I can just go out into the neighborhood or go to some local trails and whatever. And so I've been using the Zombies Run app. So people in geek circles may be familiar with that, where it sort of builds a narrative, builds a story that you're a runner working for for the local town in the zombie apocalypse, and you got to run out and get supplies or run missions and whatever. And they break it like when we last recorded. I was doing the 5K training program. It's an 8-week 5K training program. It starts you off at the beginning. Week 1 is running for like 15 seconds at a time, and then walking for a minute, and then and then the second week you build up to half a minute, and then pretty soon after 4 or 5 weeks you're running more than you're walking, and then by the end I ran an entire 5K, and so that was new as of from last week. I completed the program. I ran the entire 5K. I did not allow myself to stop and walk a single time. I ran the entire 5K.
Oh. That's fantastic, Jeff. That's a big deal.
Yeah, no, I mean, I felt, and it was a hot day too, so it was hard, but I felt good about it, right? And since then, I've kept it up. I've switched from the 5K training program, and then switched over to the regular app, which allows you to sort of set a slider, sort of where you want to be in terms of distance. And I was just setting it so that I was continuing to run a 5K. And then once you set the slider to a certain spot, it moves it up and down a little bit for you. So I've run almost 4 miles the other day, and then today was a little less than 3, but it moves it for you just based off of where you put that slider. So I've kept it up. I've gone out running 3 times a week, every week since we chatted last. And so that routine has been going really well for me. It's also a nice opportunity to get away. I run a different path through the nearby neighborhood, so I feel like I'm still connected to my community a little bit. And then once a week on the weekends, the whole family will pack up and we'll go down to, there's a river walk down in town here, and so we'll go run the trail. The boys will ride their bikes or their scooters or whatever, and Megan will run. My wife has been a runner longer than I have. But she's injured her foot in the last few weeks, so she's been giving it a break and just walking. And so that means she brings the dog, and then the dog gets to go to the trail, and we all have a good time, right? And so yeah, but it's a chance to get out. It's a chance to go somewhere, get away from the house a little bit, even during all of this. And so that's gone really well. I also said I was going to try to, on the days I wasn't doing running, I was going to try to do yoga. I have mostly done that. Sundays, because
that was with your son, right?
Yes, I was doing that with my youngest son. And I mostly did that every time it wasn't a running day. I would go out, I would do a 30-minute yoga with Adrian from the Yoga with Adrian YouTube channel, and we would do yoga together. My youngest son and I. He's 8. And that, except for Sundays, we'd oftentimes end up missing out on Sundays, because Sunday we don't have a routine, we don't have a schedule, right? And so it's hard to sort of force that time, right? During the other days of the week, my son was in school doing e-learning and that kind of stuff, and so he was required to have, we put in his schedule, he's required to have like an hour of physical activity time every day. And so he would just do yoga with me a lot, those 3-4 days of the week. But now we're out of that too, so he doesn't have that routine, and so it's hard now that that routine is gone. It's hard to sort of keep that going. So we'll see how well I can get back into that as we start to establish our new summertime routines.
I will say for all of you, so 4 weeks is a very short time for habit forming. So, I spend a lot of time with people who are new to fitness, and typically it takes about 12 weeks to form a really decent habit. And the first 4 weeks are typically very hit or miss. I counsel people a lot to be very patient with themselves, to know that it's a process. The fact that all of you had some success during this first 4 weeks, it's a big deal. It should be celebrated. And I think we have a very, I think, an American 100% or nothing, just do it, attitude. And so
and instant gratification.
Right? Yeah, and it's really easy to get down on yourself early on. 4 weeks is very little time to change a habit. 4 weeks is also very little time for you to respond to anything.
Right.
So, one of the things, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later or maybe on a different episode, but when I'm counseling people about fat loss, if that is something that they're seeking, depending upon the kind of person you are, if you're a person who wants daily statistics and can emotionally deal with the roller coaster that can bring, great. But for most people, I tell them every 8 weeks at most to be weighing yourself, because the body fluctuates up and down, like you were talking about, and 4 weeks is a very short period of time for anything to happen for us physiologically, especially as we get older. And so I applaud all three of you for being able to even to find success in those for 4 weeks. That's great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, and I normally wouldn't weigh myself very often anyway. Even when I've been trying to get in shape, and I've done weight loss challenges and all those things before, for the very reasons that you mentioned. But because we're doing this, I did want to check in every now and then just to see where I was.
Sure.
And I spent most of the last month actually up in weight a little bit from where I was a month ago. And then just this last week, it started to drop again. And so now I'm right back up where I was a month ago. So I was so disappointed in myself during grad school that I crossed over that 300-pound line. And I'm just barely, I'm at 304-ish now. And it wouldn't take a whole lot to duck under it, but it didn't happen this month. So, but I'm enjoying sort of the fitness piece of it more, and trying to do things that feel better more than the weight loss issue. So
yeah.
All right, so I think that's Sam.
I was just going to say, like you say, it feels like it shouldn't take that much to get that 4 pounds down, but that's like, shut up, man.
Well,
that's not.
So
that's not.
Yeah,
like,
that's a very again, modern fitness industry sort of idea. It's a little bit, you can feel under the surface, even though we're beginning to get into talk about this thing, and I know you, and I know you're a positive person. There's a little bit of that sort of built-in societal guilt or shame that it hasn't happened fast enough. We've all internalized that, can be so damaging to us and so dangerous as we begin this fitness journey. So it's being kind to you, remembering to be kind to yourself.
No, and I say that mostly because I've done weight loss challenges in the past, and I've been able to lose, and I've been able to lose 4 pounds in a week or two. But that was with, and this is apropos to moving into talking about the book, that was using calorie counting. And I could drop the weight fairly quick for short bursts of time, and then eventually I'd get sick of it because it gets tiresome. And then over the month or two after I stop paying attention to it, it all comes back, right? So hopefully, focusing more on the fitness, I can not worry so much about the weight, and the weight will do what it does,
Yeah.
So I think that gets us to the book. Then we've talked around the book a lot. So we read The Obesity Code by I don't have it open. Dr. What's his name?
Jeff.
Perfect.
Did you say it, Sam?
I said Dr. Jeff Long.
Jason Fung.
Oh, Jason Fung.
Jason Fung.
Yeah.
I'm like
Jeff
I'm
Long,
like,
Jason Fung.
Dr. Jason Fung. And he wrote this book. I found the background to why and how he wrote the book interesting, because it says a lot about, and maybe I'm too much in my academic headspace, and Sam gets that as well, being people with, working as professional researchers, right? Like he's coming at this from a perspective of somebody who works on he's a liver specialist, and works with people that have diabetes. Tracy, you look like you wanted to say something.
I think it was kidneys.
Was it kidneys?
But I forget.
Is he a nephrologist? I don't remember.
That was my understanding.
That could be right,
but I could be wrong.
I
Yes, he is a Canadian nephrologist.
Thank you. I finished the first half of the book several weeks ago because as Tracy and I were discussing before the recording, I have overloaded us on our schedule for this week with books to read. So I finished it a while ago, so I'd forgotten that part. But he comes at it very specifically from a kidney perspective and from a diabetes perspective, and having done other research and looked at other people's data and that kind of stuff. Which is telling. Like he's not a diet specialist, right? He's not, and maybe that's good because we're getting a different perspective. But maybe that colors his, part of me I listen to the audiobook. Part of me is listening to it while I'm running, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but how much of what he's finding is he's a hammer and so every problem is a nail, So I'm curious to hear what other people, what experiences you had reading the book. So
I would love to jump in here for just a second and say, like, I've got mixed feelings about the book thus far. I think that there's parts of this that are going to be really useful to lots of people, but I have a fundamental problem with the base premise of the book, and that's that in the first couple of chapters, it's really hammered home how terribly obese we are, and how terrible being fat is for your health, and how terrible it is that we weigh too much, and how terrible it is that we've got this obesity epidemic. There's very little, while there's much science later in the book, and he cites a lot of studies and stuff later in the book, there's very little foundational citation for this explosion in obesity and this terrible state that we put ourselves in America. We're meant to accept the basic premise that America is too fat and we're killing ourselves because of it. And it's a frustrating assertion for a handful of reasons for me. First is that there's he talks a lot about this explosion of obesity since the 70s. If we look at the rise of healthcare, of health insurance, which we know began really in the 70s, and the way that we as a society track our health radically changed during that time. And so I'm suspicious of the fact that there is some new obesity epidemic, if that is even a thing that's happening, without, I think, a larger foundation of that. I think society has accepted that. It's a good narrative. It sounds scary. In the 90s especially, we had, that it was a big scary moment for us. And I'm not saying that it's true. I just think that there's an assertion. The book begins from a place of you are society, you are bad people, you are doing a bad thing, you are killing yourselves. And it's sort of a blanket assertion and assumption that we're just supposed to accept. And I take issue with that, because then everything that comes after, I feel like, is going to come from a place of repairing something horrible that we've done to ourselves, repairing, my position of guilt or shame, which I think is counterproductive and unhealthy. And I think from the baseline, it feels like it's just coming from the wrong place. And I psychologically, as well as maybe from a medical standpoint, that it bothers me. I think there's not a lot of allowance in this discussion for the idea that health means a lot of things, and that mental and physical health are linked, although he gets to it a little bit when he talks about cortisol, and that different people who are genetically different, and again, he talks about the genetic components, or at least the inherited components of obesity, that different people are healthy at different weights. That weight is simply a measure of your mass. It is not a measure of your health. And so there's an underlying sort of one size fits all, we're in this terrible place mentality that bothers me about the book. It is entirely possible to be quite healthy and be what our society would consider overweight. It is also entirely possible to be what our society would be considered athletic and thin, like the cover of a Men's Health or a Women's Health magazine, and actually be less healthy than someone who isn't running a 7% body fat so you can see their abs. For many of us, if we got to that kind of a physical stature, that low of a body fat percentage, we would be badly unhealthy. And so it's just again, that sort of the idea that we are all suffering from an obesity epidemic that's foundational to the book because it's in the first chapters, but I don't think necessary for the rest of the book to exist, is very troubling to me, because it sets a tone for the book that I think is adversarial when it could be more helpful. The other big thing for me that's really problematic is that the discussion of obesity inevitably comes back to BMI, which is just the absolute worst measure of health. And the fact that any doctor at any of our health systems would use BMI at an individual measurement level just speaks to something that's broken in our conversation about health and about weight and about fat in our society. BMI was created, I don't know if you, sorry, I go on a rant about BMI because it infuriates me, because so many people come to me with like, my doctor says that I'm obese or whatever, or my BMI is too high, I gotta get my BMI under a number. I've had doctors over the years who are trying BMI regardless of how my actual health was. BMI was created in the mid-1800s by a Belgian physicist and astronomer to measure the health of a population. Dr. Keyes, I don't remember his first name. Keyes is his last name. It was conducted by doing like a survey of rural French male farmers to try to find average curves of health, because those were whether French or Belgian. I think the doctor is Belgian. Because they were the healthiest people that he could imagine. And it's the actual original calculations of that are not largely changed from the time that he calculated it in the mid-1800s. And you can imagine how our health has changed, and just the simple bone density, if nothing else, has changed. The size of a human being has changed. It's a bad measure, even by people who use it. If you're taller than average or shorter than average, because of the simplistic way BMI is calculated, and it's on top of it.
If you're a bodybuilder, you're obese.
You don't even have to be a bodybuilder. I am clinically obese right now. I did a body scan this morning on myself so that we could have this conversation, and I am carrying a little more body fat than I am comfortable with, thanks to my massive sugar intake during this time. But I'm certainly not unhealthy by any measure except my cholesterol, which is that way whether I'm thin or heavier. It's just a frustrating that is used as the basis of whether you are healthy or not. And finally, he built the algorithms. He said very clearly, this should be used to evaluate populations and never individuals. Like, he was very specific about it, because it isn't a measure of health. It's purely a measure of your height versus your weight. And and so those things underlying this book, to me, create a large problem with how we approach it. I think there's a lot of great stuff as the book goes on, if you are interested in losing body fat for any number of reasons. But the basic underlying premise that we as a society are somehow broken or bad or degenerate because we carry more body fat than this BMI measure, it's a dangerous premise, I think, and it's very frustrating. It was sad for me to see that when so much of the book, I think, is useful. And sorry, that's my rant about this.
No, I appreciate that. And you come from a perspective that, as somebody who works in the health industry, that the rest of us don't have. I will push back a little bit, because I feel like one of the big messages, at least in these first sections that we read, is that it's not like, I agree that he's saying that our size or obesity as a society is bad. I disagree that he's saying that it's our fault. In fact, he very explicitly has this message of it's not our fault, that there are all these conditions that have led to the obesity rate being what it is.
Sure.
So I push back a little bit just in that piece. Not that he's not saying that the obesity is a problem, but that he's not saying it's our fault that we're obese, because we've been getting bad information our whole lives.
I agree with you. He's pretty explicit about that. I think it's more of a, to me, it's more of a declamation against our society, and more of a society where we're too fat. And again, I think there's not only is that mindset, which is pervasive in our society, does it make it hard for those of us who maybe do want to change our lifestyles to feel good about ourselves enough, to love ourselves enough to take those steps. But it also creates weird barriers for people. It is people who have high BMIs, which are of health, have a harder time getting good clinical care, because many doctors are indoctrinated with the idea that if you're fat, that's your first problem. And so people have a hard time getting care for their actual ailments. People who are strong and who are fit and healthy are often looked down upon and dismissed for that. And so there's a fundamental societal problem with how we deal with fat. And while this book has lots of great stuff about how to change your body composition if you so choose, or if you need to for health reasons or whatever, but it perpetuates, I think, this sort of notion that the fundamental problem is that you all are fat. Not that it's your fault, but it's definitely a problem.
It's a problem that we're fat. Yeah.
So I want to disagree. I want to disagree with something that you said a second ago.
Me or David?
You, David.
Okay.
He said.
Usually you disagree with me. So.
Yeah, I disagree with you too. But you said that the book provides all sorts of things or ways that you can change your body to your body composition and all that. Actually, I got to tell you, I haven't heard a single thing that I can do in this right now yet. Now I haven't gotten to the whole thing, right? So we're only talking about the first third of the book.
Yeah, I will say I read the whole book, so I don't know where we broke up.
I have not yet heard anything about how I can make this information work for me. And I don't actually have a problem with him using BMI. I agree BMI is, as Fred says, hot garbage, right? It's hot garbage. I agree. But I understand why he's talking about it, because that's the only thing that some people know, right? When they go to the doctor, that's what their doctor tells them. Oh, this means bad, so this is why I'm referring to it. Here's my issue with part of the book. He sets some a premise here of three things that he mentions. He says, we're not going to talk about animal studies in the book, which is fine. I don't disagree with that. That's okay, except that you're getting rid of a large body of data about mammals. But that's fine, actually. For his purposes, it's okay.
He also keeps coming back to animal anecdotes, though. He says we're not going to look at animal studies, but he's...
Right. But then he says, and where possible, I'm concerned with causative studies. I really want to look at causative studies. I am using some associative studies or some association studies. So here's what that means. That means correlation. He's talking about correlation. He calls them association studies. That's just a fancy word for correlation, right? But here's my, and I am actually okay with that. Here's my problem. Then 90% of what he presents is a freaking correlation study. Almost none of what he presents is causative studies, because we don't have them.
Right.
Most of what he is presenting and then stating as fact because of this study or that study is all correlative information. And so does it really support what he's trying to say? I don't know. Unfortunately, I'm also listening to it as an audiobook. I listen to it while I do the dishes every day. So I don't have I know it has look at the chart on page, whatever. And I think that came with the audiobook. I haven't looked at that stuff, right? I haven't actually sat down and looked at it. And so I haven't actually looked at the studies he's citing, although I probably will by the time I finish the book. But that's my main, and then he says this book is about obesity, not diabetes, but his main thrust is about insulin. And you can't separate diabetes from talking about insulin. You can't suddenly say, I'm going to pretend like diabetes isn't a main focus here, and I'm only going to talk about insulin as a main driver of these behavioral and physiological effects that we have, because it's directly related.
Well, and that's kind of the statement I made about how to a hammer, every problem is a nail, right? To a diabetes specialist, every problem comes down to insulin, and how much of what he found was confirming what he already believed, and how much is a comprehensive look at things. Tracy, we haven't heard from you yet. Yeah.
So there's one reason that I'm being a little quiet, and that's because I have not only read the whole of this book, but he has a separate one that where he does actually focus on the diabetes part of it, and called Diabetes Code, I think. But one of the interesting things is he wasn't a diabetes doctor. He was a kidney doctor. And the problem is there is connections between diabetes and a lot of times kidney function and stuff like that. And my understanding is what happened was a lot of the patients that he had coming in for kidney issues happened to also have been diagnosed with diabetes. And in order to treat the kidney issues that they were having, he had to help them get their diabetes under control. So, I think maybe that comes out more later in the book. I also can't. It's hard to keep with the same author. It's hard to keep two different books that I read pretty close together, completely separated.
Very similar sort of themes.
Right, and so it was. And I'm just enjoying the discussion because, like I said, I've read both of the books. I've gone through them. I found them somewhat useful and interesting, but was also skeptical. So I'm just listening in on the conversation with people, particularly, Sam. I was super interested because of your background to hear more about what your thoughts were about it. And it is unfortunate that the whole first part of the book is setting up why he ends up making the argument in the second half.
Which I assumed was
Which then, of course, means... Yeah. I mean, that's not too much of a spoiler, I think.
Yeah, no. And unfortunately for me, I got really bored. I'm already bored with the book, right? Because most of what he's saying are things I already... Like, if he cites a study or if he says, well, this shows this, so that means... Right, I've already gotten there because I teach I teach anatomy and physiology, so I teach about the endocrine system. Like, I understand what's happening. So I'm sitting here listening to it, and I'm like, okay, get to the meat of what is your point? You've convinced me that what you're saying has validity. Now tell me what you're actually.
But you're not
the
typical audience for the book either. So.
Yeah, I know.
That's the interesting part potentially. So, and it goes back to, and I wanted to just posit this out there because I read through a lot of, before I even picked it up, I had read through a lot of the comments on Amazon and other places about what people were saying about the book. And one of the comments I read was that this book isn't actually really for the general person in the U.S. Like, it's useful for them, but what it might be more aimed towards is helping convince their primary care physician, who might be working with 20 or more years of out-of-date info, as to why maybe trying this approach might be a good thing. And I was wondering, both from particularly David and Sam, how you folks thought about that possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably have a stronger sense of that if I was reading it in hardback, right, like in Dead Tree form. But listening to it, I mean, I don't know. I have to think about that. I don't know.
So I hear that, and to me that makes a lot of sense across a couple of dimensions. Not that I'm a physician or a scientist, and if I was, it would have been the physics that I went to school for, not this. But for personal trainers and nutritionists and people like that, I think that the language of this book is very much the language of convincing those people. And I think it's a little bit the nature of a self-help book in general. There's a lot of repetition because really when you're writing a self-help book, which I'm doing right now, full disclosure, you've got like a third of a book worth of actual information, and the rest of it is just repeating the same thing over and over to get your page count. And that's just the reality of a self-help book, in part because it's how people learn, and in part it's because of the publishing world. So there's a lot of that going on, and it's a little bit of what Sam was saying, in that there's a lot of science that's called out, but it's a lot of correlative studies that it's mixed in with a lot of anecdote, and that to me, for better or for worse, is the language of the fitness industry, calling on studies that maybe don't mean exactly what were put out there, or were done on groups that are not the target group that you're talking to, or were done a long time ago and irrelevant, or partial studies, or whatever correlative stuff, or whatever. That's very much the bread and butter of the fitness industry. Not to denigrate the industry that I'm in, but it's very much the bread and butter of that industry. So I can see, Tracy, where it would definitely be convincing a nutritionist or something like that to sort of drift in this way, or at least experiment.
Well, and I wonder if it has, if it's effective in that regard. Like, I think about, so my wife read this book long before I did. She read it years ago. That's why I have it in my Audible libraries, because she got it and listened to it. And I think it was really impactful for her. But then she sort of continued that journey in terms of her diet and fitness and whatever, to the point that now she's very critical of a lot of the book as well. Like, because now she's read a lot of the critique and the people who came afterwards that talk about the problems with it or whatever. And then I think about, like, she and I several years ago had the same doctor, right? And I went into the doctor and they're like, well, these levels are kind of high. We want you to start a low-fat diet, right? My cholesterol was high. We want you to start a low-fat diet. And then my wife went in and they're like, well, your cholesterol is a little bit high, not as high as your husband's, but a little bit high. We want you to start a low-fat diet. And she's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. I'm doing this other thing. I'm doing low carb, low sugar, and what have you. It's like, oh, well, that sounds fine. Do that. And I'm like, well, then which advice do they, like, why are they giving two different people different advice based on that response? Like, if one of them is effective, why is she getting different advice than I am? So.
And I think this is one of the hard things about any kind of like a self-help book, especially around fitness and nutrition and things like that, because I consume probably more than the average person, although I typically don't super enjoy reading them, is that it's depending upon the voice, the authorial voice. There's a lot of this is the solution in the book, and in part it's because that's how you sell the book. But it's another, what I would offer maybe a dangerous premise, in that there's a one size fits all for anybody. Our circumstances are different, our genetics are different, our emotional health and emotional life is different. The levers of our lives are all different, and all of these things affect our health and fitness in our body. And so there's not a one size fits all. Adherence is going to be different person to person. There's so many variables, and so I am a proponent of trying things, healthy things, not starvation things, or putting crystals in body orifices or anything, but of trying reasonable things, because that's how we find the thing that works for us. Like, I know under what dietary conditions I thrive, but that's after 7 years of experimentation within reason. And for everybody that begins to seek a fitness journey, finding that thing that makes you feel good, that ultimately has good outcomes, and that you can also adhere to, that's the holy grail. Not necessarily a specific, type of diet or something.
And I guess my one question is, it's been a couple months now, I think, since I've read it. Did we get to the Atkins one for this one at all?
So yeah, Atkins is toward the end of this first half. They talk about Atkins.
Yeah, and then
I've gotten to that in the book, but we aren't actually supposed to be covering that yet. But let's talk about it.
I think they talked about it in the because I only read the first half. I didn't go any further. I remember a conversation about the Atkins diet. Atkins diet was all the rage a few years ago, and all that. Yeah, and in fact, I can tell you about where the halfway point was. Because I got to the halfway point and stopped listening to it on the day I did my 5K. And while I'm doing the 5K, I'm listening to the segment where he's talking about how exercise doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah.
So maybe we should talk about that one a little bit, because one of the things that I'm having a hard time with is I never walked away from any part of the book thinking that he was selling one solution for how to fix things, other than potentially, and I know this is in the second half, but I already talked about it a little bit earlier, the whole idea of intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating is another way people are putting it. But even there, like, there's no prescribed, this is how you do that. So I'm very interested in how how it came across that this is like the way, or that he's selling a specific way of doing things. And I thought that came up a little bit in the Atkins section, because part of the reason, most people know this even outside the book, that Atkins often doesn't work for folks is because it's so restrictive and so prescriptive and telling you exactly what you can and can't eat, and really nailing down like a small minimal number of carbs and stuff like that just made it so most people couldn't keep with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for me the singular thrust of his book is that controlling insulin and to a lesser degree cortisol in your adrenals is how you control your weight, right? And he, you know, he does have chapters in there that say specifically, one of the chapters is called "I Can Make You Fat," and there's one called "I Can Make You Thin." And he doesn't suggest that you should artificially suppress your insulin or increase your insulin, but just demonstrating that as far as he's concerned, that is the dial. And it's not. I'm not a scientist who can say it's not the dial, but as far as the book is concerned, that's the dial. And I think the exercise thing is really interesting to me because he's so focused on fat loss. The exercise doesn't work is, and I don't actually generally disagree with him in the sense that when people join my gym or when they begin their health journey, I often counsel them that, you know, you in my mind, you don't exercise to lose weight. There's lots of things that we can do if you want to lose fat, and we can attack them from different directions, but largely that's about food. What you're eating, why, how much, when you eat, all that kind of stuff, along with physical activity, which is very important. You may find that you lose weight coming to the gym depending upon what you do, and you keep it off if you're consistent. You may find that you gain weight if you put on a bunch of muscle. You may find that for 2 years, and 2 years is a pretty consistent plateau, you do a great job, and then things plateau and you start to backslide because you're aging and your basal metabolic rate is changing and all of these inputs and things that he talks about in the book. But there are reasons to exercise beyond just trying to.
And he says that in there as well.
And I think, yeah. And so that's the big thing is when you're just looking for a weapon to solve the problem that he's trying to solve, exercise alone isn't, you know, the kind of 1980s idea that you're going to burn calories. And one of the things that infuriates me again about my industry is when you see like a Barry's boot camp out here in LA is very popular, and they guarantee 1,000 calories burned in every workout, and it's maddening. Right. Because it's not. That's not.
And having diabetes type 2 when I got pregnant. So one of the reasons the book was was also super interesting to me. So when I was pregnant, I had to go on insulin because most of the medications that help control blood sugar aren't considered safe. That doesn't mean it's unsafe, but it's not safe during pregnancy. And so I had to take insulin, but the doctors, everyone was like freaking out that like, make sure you don't gain weight because insulin will help you gain weight because that's part of, at least according to them, what it does. So it was very interesting reading those chapters. And I do have like my family has a history of diabetes. And again, like, you know, the idea that we know that this drug, that this thing that you need, and some people do absolutely need it, and then a lot of times it is used for a treatment for insulin resistance, does tend to lead to weight gain. It is kind of hard sometimes to fathom that is the best that we have for treating if other things don't work. And that's where I was like super interested in, because I think, Sam, you've done some stuff and work in this area. What if you had, like, is that all just a lie?
So here's one of my major problems with his thesis. Okay, when you look at hormones activate target cells in a couple of different ways. He presents it in the book. My first issue is he presents it one way, and that's not true. I think he just did it to make it more simple, though. So I'm okay with that. Also, by the way, there's a couple of factual inconsistencies in chapter 3, but that's beside the point as well. I think it was just for time. He just made it. It just didn't get caught in the proofread, right? So
Sam is an academic, so he spends a lot of time saying this is wrong, but it's fine. Let's get to the thing that I'm really upset about.
I'm just saying I'm not. I want to call it out because I want people to know that, like, this book is not perfect. Like, the things he's saying are not 100% right on, and they're not 100% right off, but there are some things in it that just got missed in editing or whatnot that you know, that are technically untrue. But in this case, it was about different hormones, not insulin. So that's why I say it doesn't really matter, because it doesn't affect theoretically. Now I'm doing air quotes now because it doesn't technically affect his premise. Let me give you a little lesson. When hormones get secreted, most of them, so there's two types of secretions, but most of them get secreted and they go into the bloodstream and they move around the bloodstream and they find target cells and they get access to cells that have receptors for them because they travel through the blood. But no cell just has one type of receptor. So many types of cells, no matter where you are in the body, will have receptors that can be activated by multiple different hormones. And what that means is that it's not one hormone interacting with that cell. And so hormone interaction becomes really complex. See three general patterns when hormones are trying to affect the same target cell. One of the patterns is called synergism, and that is where if hormone A is present around that cell, it will activate that cell to a certain extent and cause some kind of effect. If hormone B alone is there, it will also activate that cell by itself and have some sort of effect. If A and B are there together, the effect they produce is far more than just a linear addition of those two hormones together. It's a different effect altogether on a different scale. Okay? That's one way they can affect each other. The second way is they can be the opposite of synergistic, which is antagonistic. They could cause, one hormone shows up and causes a change in that cell so that it no longer listens to the second hormone if the second hormone happens to show up, or vice versa. And sometimes it's concentration dependent. It's not whether one or the other is there. It's the concentrations of the two of them. It also has to do with time of day and what other hormones are there and all that kind of stuff. That gets really, really complex. Sometimes that pathway is in a completely different loop, physiologically speaking, but it affects that organ, or it's sometimes directly on the same cell. So that suddenly is really, really complex. He treats it in this book like it's very dead simple, and it's not. The third way is permissiveness. A lot of times you have a hormone that comes along, and when it affects the target cell, it acts as a primer so that now that cell is able to listen to a second type of hormone that comes along. And if you hadn't had that permissive first hormone come along, when the second hormone shows up, that target cell isn't able to hear the message from that second one unless the first one was there already. Okay, so now think about this. I'm just describing hormone A and hormone B in all three of those circumstances, but now imagine there's 7 hormones,
right?
And there's 4 different kinds, and the concentration of each of those hormones matters, and the numbers of receptors on each of those, and how much what the density of those types of cells are in that area or that organ matters. Now throw that into the pot and you have a big giant Italian wedding soup with all kinds of different things in it that when you pull out a spoonful, it's going to be different every time. Okay? So I'm not trying to make it overly complicated, but as soon as you start talking about hormones, it's never just one thing. And his focus is so one-dimensional, at least when I've gotten to the point in the book where I'm at. It's so one-dimensional right now that I don't even know where he's going. I mean, I do now because Tracy's here, but I wasn't even sure. Right?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, it's fine. I'm not. I don't get spoiled. Right?
It's not a story.
But you know what I mean? Like, it's right.
Sam, you're amazing. This is this explanation is wonderful. I really appreciate this. I think. Do you know the Gestalt principle? This is from my math background, but there's the idea that the oversimplification of a thing becomes the thing in the public's eye, and you lose the ability for the thing to have meaning any longer because it's been oversimplified too far. That's
well, and here's the other thing. In that activation discussion, I didn't even mention how you monitor hormones and how you regulate their release, right? There's 3 different ways to do that too. And it matters what the physiological state of that organ is, how that, like, the release of insulin, it's not just, you ate a bite of food, suddenly insulin's released. That's not really how it works. So I just want to caution people, right? Like, anytime you read a book like this, on some level, they have to kind of dumb it down. I hate to say it that way because it's not really dumbed down. It's not, I don't mean that like the author is assuming everybody's stupid. That's not what I mean. And I don't assume everybody's stupid, but it has to be written in a language that tries to make it as simple as possible. The understanding can be conveyed. But at some point, as you said, when you get to this gestalt where you have simplified it to the point where it has no complexity at all, you've lost the meaning of what's actually happening. And therefore, your solution can't actually address that thing in its entirety, because the only thing your solution addresses is the singular gestalt idea that was presented, or that was the manifestation of that presentation. And I don't think that this I'm not saying all this as a critique to say that this doctor is lying or that he's misconstruing things or anything like that. I think that he did a really good job of going through the literature and going through studies and trying to synthesize a lot of disparate material, but it's too simple. It's too simple.
A big chunk of what's going on.
Right. And when you're saying it's too simple, you're not even, and in part because you don't know exactly where it's going yet, you're not even countering it fully or saying that it was wrong. You're just saying it's hard to, like, if you were to use the evidence he's currently presenting and get no further evidence, it would be hard. Any conclusion he came to would be difficult for you to feel comfortable with. Is that right? Kind of where you are? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because insulin itself, so here's the other thing. When a hormone acts on a target cell, it doesn't always just make the same response. Like, it's not true to say, well, a hormone attaches to a target cell and it makes that target cell produce proteins, right? Or a hormone attaches to that target cell and it makes that target cell secrete its own chemical, or it makes that target cell work faster so that the metabolic rate of that cell increases. Like, all three of those are possible. Which one is it? Well, it depends. It depends on what cell you're talking about, how many receptors were activated, how much hormone concentration is there, what the other physiological attributes are in that local area as well as in the organ as a whole. I mean, it suddenly gets really complicated. It's never just that easy. So yeah, I'm not saying that he's wrong. I'm saying it's really hard to not say, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what if this happens? Well, what, and he kind of says that, because he says, at some point, I remember him saying something about, lots of people go to the doctor and they get a prescribed, medication or a prescribed diet, and it doesn't work. But then he goes on, almost in every case, goes on to say, well, here's why it didn't work.
Right.
And then he gives you some reason why, calories in doesn't equal calories out. And so it supports his premise. But maybe that's not the reason why it didn't work for that person. Plus, that was a correlative study, so you can't, right? Like,
right. Although, on the other hand, going back to what you're saying about how complex hormones are, calories in and calories out is also a huge oversimplification that he's trying to counteract, right?
Right. Yeah. And exactly. But that's kind of what I mean, though, is that he presents this structured, here's all the things that goes into that, right? And I took notes when I was listening to this. He says the basal metabolic rate, here I wrote it over here. The basal metabolic rate, the thermogenic effect of food, the non-exercise activity, thermogenesis, and the EPOC, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. Okay, I teach about all of these things, right? So, I mean, and then exercise itself, and he's right about what he says about that is true, that you can't just take one of those things and suddenly make it the item that affects this the most. Like, it does depend on physiological state, how much each of them is a dial that's turned and what effect that has. That's absolutely true. But then later on, he goes back simple and he takes these studies and he says, well, here's why this study showed that result. Here's why this study showed none of these people lost weight, or here's why this. And he tries to make it simple
so
again.
He spends a lot of time saying that previous approaches oversimplified, and then he turns around and oversimplifies in his own way.
Right. And I think part of that is because of, not to keep dominating the conversation, but I think what David said earlier was true, right? That part of that is because he's trying to get people to understand all of this in a simple way so that they're able to absorb it all, and he's very repetitious. and it's true, repetition, that's how you learn, right? So is somebody reading this or watching it, they're going to go, oh yeah, I remember you said that earlier, now tell me more about it. Oh yeah, I remember you said that earlier, now tell me more about it. And so that's why he's doing that. Otherwise the book would only be 3 chapters instead of 20. So I get it. I'm not trying to like throw the guy under the bus. I totally understand why it's laid out this way. But as a scientist, I can't help but see these issues that feel a little bit disingenuous because his whole focus is on insulin.
So I think at one point I was thinking that we've been very critical, and that it might be good to have a conversation about what we are getting out of it. But I think that's gonna be a better conversation after we've read the second half anyway, where he's actually making suggestions about things, and we're well over our expected time. But it looks like David had one last thought he wants to get in, and we still have to talk about our goals.
I do have something positive to say about this. So
I do too. So I'll go after you, and I'll say a positive thing about it too. And then Tracy.
The discussion's so fascinating and so wonderful, and I think basically, I mean, it's asking us to think critically. It's asking us to think broadly. I think about ourselves more holistically. And Sam, your discussion about hormones is wonderful because it reminds us that there's a holistic system at play. And I think that's so critically important whenever we're talking about our health. What I do like about this is it does help. I hope it would help a reader understand that first, they're not a failure because previous caloric deficit diets haven't done for them what they want, or they've gained their weight back, and helping us understand about potential long-term damage that we do to our metabolism when we do caloric restriction, something that I think is wildly underreported in the fitness world. When you restrict, your body compensates, and you don't always get that back, especially as we age. So making sure you don't do damage to yourself in these processes is super important. And the other thing that I really like is I do, while he's clearly oversimplifying this, I do like the discussion that he touches on cortisol a little bit toward the end of this first part that we read. And the idea that when we are under stress, our bodies behave differently. Our different hormones are activated, and the hormones that do different things. And I think that's a critical part of our understanding of our health writ large, whatever you're trying to do to your body. Understanding that if you can't find a way to get appropriate rest, your body's you're gonna have diminishing returns, whatever positive things you're doing. Whether you're sleep deprived because you're an insomniac, or because you're taking the American idea of working yourself to death, and that's the way you gain prestige or whatever, you're potentially damaging yourself in that way. When we're in this time of sort of low grade or high grade panic all the time because we're sequestered inside because of a pandemic, whatever we do for ourselves that's positive is going to be dampened or mitigated or changed slightly because of the stress that we're under. And so letting people be okay with things not working out maybe the way that they want to all the time, and acknowledge that the stresses of your life, be they pandemic sequester, be they kids, be they lack of sleep because of work, or be they family issues, those things do affect you, and you have to have patience with yourself and roll with them. I loved that being part of the discussion because it's so important to recognize.
All right, Sam, you wanted to say a positive thing?
I think that despite my previous critique, I do want to say that he does a good job of bringing a wide variety of different types of studies in, and showing how those studies were trying to show something that they thought was going to be the case, and then that didn't happen. And that despite the fact that it didn't happen, the food industry went in a certain direction, and that might be problematic, but it's not because our studies necessarily are flawed, or it's not because the people performing those studies or participating in those studies were just bad people or were just inherently flawed. It's just that we didn't have answers for a very long time, because some things work for some people and some things work for others, and you couldn't get a study that wasn't contradictory for a really long time. He does a really good job of laying all that out and kind of doing almost a historical perspective about dietary research and how the different governmental guidelines and food pyramids and all that actually affected in a broad range the population. I think he does a decent job of that, and I think he as a non-nutritionist, right? He's not a nutritionist, but as a non-nutritionist, he did a really good job of bringing that all in and saying, basically, all of these things try to lead us to be more consumer, right? To be consumers and to try to enhance our consumerism and also trying to help ourselves, but it's really not our fault because none of those studies actually showed the things that everybody thought they were going to show. And so I do want to say he's really good at presenting the studies and explaining them and explaining why they didn't work. Which is why I had a hard time answering the question in the beginning about, is it written for like dietitians and physical therapists and whatnot, in order for, and for doctors, for patients to say, hey doc, you haven't looked at diet research for 20 years. Look at this new thing, right? Like I can't even go that far because I think he also tried to write it in a way that the general public can consume this book and understand what's happening.
Yeah. Tracy, last thoughts?
So I just want to also, I know I've kind of said it before, but in particular for next time, like there was a lot of stuff in my journey with the pregnancy and stuff like that brought up a lot of the things that he talks about. So I understand potential confirmation bias, which is why I'm trying to go back and have this second look at it and talk to other folks about it. But I thought it was really good in my mind to have that historical background that Sam was talking about, in part because, I went through this whole pregnancy. I lost 40 pounds during the pregnancy because of how I was eating, and even with the constant stress of just the doctors, because if your blood sugar is high during pregnancy, the chances of certain types of birth defects that are pretty horrific increase. And then later on, the chances of the pregnancy not going full term increase. So there was a lot of pressure to get it right. And then it was very strange to go through that process, to eat better, to lose 40 pounds, and then be told, I had this stupid little quiz with the healthcare thing that we had. It was like, are you eating enough whole grains? And I'm like, I'm eating hardly any whole grains because that didn't seem to really do well for me. But it was chiding me to eat 6 to 8 servings of whole grains each day. And I was like, what are you doing to me?
Did you see Fred's comments in the chat? Fred says that your son was 40% hummus by volume at birth.
So I was hitting salad bars, but of course I couldn't eat any of the... there's just a lot of stuff that makes eating healthy during pregnancy very interesting. But yeah, no, and then they get chided about, that I'm not eating more grains. And I'm like, I'm just not eating carbs right now because that worked really well for me. And and all this other stuff. So I appreciate that part of the book. I still need to be skeptical and think through it, is all. Right, yeah. I hope that was mostly positive.
No, and I think this if anything else, this oversimplifications, the problems that it has, the confirmation bias potential, and all that kind of stuff. I think at the very least, it is a book that is getting us thinking and encouraging and facilitating this conversation, which I feel like is a positive conversation for us to have. I look forward to when we get into the second half and we can sort of get into the recommendations that are being made and talk about those. I haven't read the second half, but I have suspicions about where it's going because I know what my wife did after she read it. So, so I look forward to sort of seeing where that goes and what have you. But I think it's time we've been recording for an hour and 15 minutes. It's probably time to talk about our goals for next month and where we're going for the future. So we'll go in reverse order that we did before. So I'll start off. I've decided, especially after our conversation at the beginning of this episode, I'm not going to worry about my weight for the next month, but I'm going to continue to focus on the running, the gym. in Indiana, the gym has reopened as of like today, but we've put a freeze on our membership. They've allowed us to do that because we don't really want to go to the gym in the middle of all of this and what we've been seeing lately. So I'm going to continue pushing the running, and my goal, I think my goals are, I want to try to improve in my running to the point that I've reached a 16-minute mile, which I think is doable. I'm hitting pretty close, just a little bit over that most of the time on most of my runs now. So I think that's an achievable goal. And I want to find something to do on the off days that even when I don't have the routine or whatever, I want to find something. If it's not yoga or whatever, although my son likes doing the yoga, I don't know how much I'm getting out of it, but he, maybe if it's something that for him, that's fine. I'll figure out. I'll do it, but I want to find something to do in the off days. So, and then not beat myself up over not doing things on Sundays. I think it's okay to have one day a week that I'm not doing something. So.
Absolutely.
So that's my goals. Tracy, what about you?
I think, and I feel like I may have said this was the goal last time too, but it's slightly harder in the pandemic is to get the exercise back in. And it's slightly harder for me because both Fred and I are working the full-time jobs and doing childcare duties because our child's home full-time. And he's not even 4 yet, so it's not like I can go for a run with him. He's too big for a stroller and too small to go fast. So I got to figure that part out, and that was like that. And I also have to just deal with I think eventually I'll have to deal with the emotions around the pandemic stuff. Part of the reason we ended up starting this was for about a month or so before the lockdowns and stuff started happening was I actually had finally figured out a plan for how I could exercise every day, like a good 30 minutes to an hour, and was doing it. And then all of it got swiped away. So that's going to be I think my big thing is just trying to figure out, because it'll help with stress and it will help with some of the other stuff.
Sam, what's your goal for the next month?
So, I want to do something active every day, and I had talked last episode about maybe starting up my Tai Chi, because I have a Tai Chi video that I used to do, because it really it relieves my joints, right? Because it's slow and it's methodical, and it's still like, whatever. Anyway, it's kind of like the intention there is for the same thing that Jeff is saying about the yoga. That's what the Tai Chi would do for me. So I want to start that. I want to do it at least twice a week, and I would like to walk every day. When I say that, the weather always gets in the way. So so that's why I say I would like to. But I won't beat myself up if I can walk 4 days a week and then do Tai Chi the other 3, or have some overlap there, Tai Chi and walk on certain days. I still, I know weight is not the main thing, but I do want to make sure that I maintain sort of a downward or at least a plateau and not gain any. So it's not about the number, it's about being able to at least have something manageable that it feels okay for me. And the reason for that is because, as I said last time, when I do lose weight and I get below like 235, I sleep a lot better. And that's what I'm really looking for. So
I'm going to try to take David's advice and not weigh myself at all before the next, for the next recording. Yeah. I'm not going to weigh myself then. I'll wait 2 months and weigh myself and see where I'm at. But David, what are your fitness goals? Where are you headed right now?
So right now, as it's getting very hot here in Los Angeles, continuing the increased cardio is a big thing for me. That's more for my heart health and everything than anything else. And I'm watching my diet, my dietary sugar intake. Like, as I said before, I'm a big candy and baked goods and cookies person. And this, my stress level in the pandemic has been managed through candy. And so I'm trying to exchange that for meditation and the things that I know that are better for my body. So that's my big goal.
Very good. All right, then I think we're going to go ahead and say that's where we're at for this month. If you have questions, you can find the show on Facebook, on Twitter, as at The Tome Show, or you can email thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can also ask us for our Discord link at any time. where we have a D&D fitness channel. In fact, I think I could probably argue, other than when Sam and Brandis go crazy back and forth about stuff, the fitness channel I think is our most active channel on the Discord server. So on any given day. So definitely.
Did you see that bus? That bus just came and drove right over me.
But yeah, so I think if you tweet at us or email or whatever, we can definitely post you whatever the latest link is for the Discord, and we'd love to chat with you there. You can reach all of us individually on Twitter. I am at Squatch, SQUACH. David, you are what? David Net.
David Net, yeah, NETT, all one word.
Tracy.
At Sarah Dark Magic with an H.
And Sam.
No.
All right, and that's
without an H.
Without an H. And that's where we are on our fitness quest today. Please come along and join us for the next time as we build our geekiness and our health. The end.
Excellent.
All right. What'd you come up with?
That's wonderful, Tracy.
Hold it closer so I can see what the. Okay, nice.
That's really cool.
I was trying to see the flower patterns. Those are the ones where you've got that attached ahead of time and you sort of paint over and around it?
Yeah, there's stamps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So I stamped it up during the early on and then just figured it out.
Nice.
I'll post a picture online.
Oh, beautiful.
This is part of my stress relief thing.
It's so great. I mean, I think I was just so excited to talk to you guys today. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. This was really wonderful.
Well, you're gonna be on at least 3 times in our first 6 months, because you're gonna be on these 2 episodes, and then we're gonna get you on a few episodes after that with your wife and talk about sort of what the 2 of you have done together. So.
Yeah, I'm so excited for it. I thought any kind of thoughtful, holistic discussion about health I think it's just a wonderful counterpoint to how our society normally treats it, and I really appreciate all of your thoughtfulness in approaching this. I think it's a big deal. The D&D Fitness hashtag I think is a wonderful thing to have happened, and it's a lot focused on building muscles and building strength and stuff, which makes me super happy. I haven't seen a major focus there on getting skinny or anything, which is the the sort of the thing that we're fighting constantly.
The stereotype,
and that assumption that everybody wants to be skinny or should be trying to get skinny. And I've really been happy with it being focused more on getting strong and getting healthy, and it really makes me happy. So this has been such a nice discussion. So thank you for this.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Well, we should all say goodbye to the people on the stream, because I'm going to shut that off here.